My name is Dave Myers. I'm a manager in the mental health program at Bryan Medical Center. I've been there for the past 16 years. And the medical center is committed to our community, state, and region in terms of the provision of behavioral health services and providing outreach to our community in terms of suicide prevention. One of the things that I'm here to talk to you about today is suicide prevention. One of the things that the state of Nebraska formed back in 1999 was the Nebraska State Suicide Prevention Coalition. It was at that time that the former Surgeon General, David Satcher, declared suicide a public health problem and said that the states needed to band together to address suicide prevention. The state of Nebraska pulled folks together and we formed a voluntary coalition called the Nebraska State Suicide Prevention Coalition. I co-chair that coalition along with Dr. Don Belau, who's a school psychologist in Geneva, school psychologist at the YRTC in Geneva. Unfortunately, Don was not able to be here today as he was going to come up and say a few words as well. The coalition is a voluntary group made up of committed and passionate people representing public and private agencies, suicide survivors, and Nebraska's interested in suicide prevention. Our coalition is recognized by the state of Nebraska as the coordinating body responsible for coordinating suicide prevention efforts in the state of Nebraska. What I want to tell you a little about are some of the things that we have available through the coalition that you might be of interest to you. On the back table, or on the side table over here, we do have some sheets of paper that say Suicide Prevention Coalition on there. It gives a little information about the coalition. It also gives our website, suicideprevention.nebraska.edu. It's a great website that has a lot of resource information. There's also a connection there to a website that we developed for youth suicide prevention. The link is youthsuicideprevention.nebraska.edu. On there is a wealth of information and resources that we have available here in Nebraska for suicide prevention. One of the individuals I'd like to introduce to you is Jordan Jacobson, if Jordan would stand up in the back of the room. Jordan is the Suicide Prevention and Military Outreach Coordinator that we have available here in the state of Nebraska. Jordan's office is downtown here in Lincoln at Interchurch Ministries of Nebraska. So some of the things I'm going to tell you about, Jordan would be the main contact to reach out to access some of the things, and Jordan's information is available through the websites. Iris mentioned a very important training, the QPR training, Question, Persuade, and Refer. That is a training that the coalition adopted a couple years ago, and through a grant, through a federal grant that we just finished with last September, we were able to place approximately 24 QPR trainers across the state of Nebraska. So if that is a training that you're interested in, you want to bring that to your communities and have a QPR trainer for your school or for your community, contact Jordan and he can help you get connected to the closest QPR trainer that's available within your region. Another training that we have available is called the AMSR training, Assessing and Managing Suicidal Risk, and that is more of a full day training. We do have 3 trainers here in the state of Nebraska who can provide that training, of more in-depth training for suicide prevention for professionals. If you're interested in those trainings, or you're interested in developing suicide prevention practices within your schools or within your communities, the coalition operates off of private donations and grants. So again, we're a voluntary group, but over the years we've been very fortunate to have access to some grants and some funding. And currently we have a grant through the Kim Foundation that is going to allow us to provide some seed grants to communities. We will have an application available on the Suicide Prevention Coalition website that you can go there, fill out an application if you're interested in developing or implementing suicide prevention programs within your community. There are small mini grants up to $1,000, and we've been able to do some very wonderful things across the state with those mini grants. I know Donna Wolf and Andreas Sandoval are here from Norfolk. Donna's going to be presenting this afternoon, but they've done some great things in Norfolk, and great leaders in suicide prevention and helping spread the word in their community. So, and I know there's others here in the room that have accessed resources through the coalition as well. Last thing I want to mention is that the coalition developed what's called the LOSS Team, Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. It's a team of individuals that have experienced suicide themselves and their family, and mental health clinicians. And it's a voluntary group that we piloted and then we have available here in Lincoln, Lancaster County. We're a group of individuals that are available when the police arrive on the scene and it's declared a suicide. They dispatch and call the LOSS Team that go out and provide outreach and support to families. And our goal is to try to take that concept and spread that across Nebraska and help other communities develop LOSS teams. Also on the table, there's a flyer for a LOSS Team walk that we have scheduled for June 1st at Holmes Lake here in Lincoln. So if you're interested in participating in that and learning more about that, it's called Surviving the Stigma, A Walk for Hope. So if you have any questions about any of that, please visit with myself or Jordan. We'll be here throughout the day, or please reach out and access the Coalition website. Coalition meetings are once a month. We have a calendar on the website. Coalition is open to anybody who has an interest in suicide prevention, and we do utilize the telehealth technology where we reach out to hospitals and public health agencies across the state. So if you can't drive to Lincoln to the meeting, we can look at trying to connect you through either the telephone or through the telehealth technology. Thank you.
Please welcome Pam Dinneen.
Thank you. I thought when they wired me up, I could move around the room, and that's what I'm used to doing when presenting, and they said, oh no, that's just for the cameras. You have to stand behind the podium so everybody can hear you. So this is not my norm, and so it'll feel a little awkward for me in standing still as I talk. So you may see my hands going as my movement, because I'm usually one who moves about a lot more. I am the founder of Mourning Hope. If those of you who don't know what Mourning Hope is a grief support program for children, teens, young adults, and their caregivers who have experienced either the death or a serious illness of someone significant in their lives. It was actually created many years ago. For 23 years, the past 23 years, I was a school counselor here in Lincoln and also on the crisis response teams. And there were many times throughout our experiences of having a crisis response that we were saying, gosh, we really need to have families be more involved and be able to support families a lot more as the students are going through this. We know as crisis teams, we are there to support the crisis within the school at that time and help manage that. But the students go home and then begin grieving much longer after that, and we need to have ongoing support for those students. John Dudley at the time was our supervisor, and many of you may know of him, and he said, you know, Pam, there really isn't anything out there. You need to just start it. I'm like, sure, I'll just start it in my basement. That'll be fine. But he says, no, really. And so we started getting some training in different areas and in different ways, and got tuned into a program. Actually, I took training in Fort Collins, Colorado from Alan Wolfelt, who's a thanatologist, grief educator, speaks many places across the nation, and excuse me, and he said, you need to go to the Dougie Center in Portland, Oregon. Sorry. I just came back from Honduras. We did a mission trip, and I kind of brought some stuff back, I think. So he said, go out to Portland, Oregon, and learn more about what they're doing, because they have a nationally known center, and you need to learn from them. So I went to Portland, Oregon, and they really train you how to come back to your own community, assess the needs of what you need, and then create a program that really supports what your community needs. So we created Mourning Hope in 1993 and began groups in 94. Shortly after having many teen deaths that year of either accident or suicides, and knowing that we had a lot of really hurting students that really needed some ongoing support, and their families were needing that as well. So that was the beginning, and we've kind of continued to increase that programming throughout, and now have programs for not only teens, but children, young children, elementary age, middle school age, college age, and now have just started a young adult program. But mostly to know how to support and offer that continued ongoing support for families and giving them some education on what's normal as people grieve, what kinds of things they can expect, and really how to give them hope. And so that's what Mourning Hope is all about, if you hadn't heard about that. But a lot of what I'll be talking about today is more in schools, and because I was a school counselor for 23 years, I just did the Rule of 85 deal this last year, and am now the Director of Care Ministries at Southwood Lutheran Church. So I am not in the schools right now, but I'm doing a lot of grief work in the church, and finding that to be an interesting new component in my life. So I want to share with you, though, many of the things, let's see if I can turn this, that we've learned through being a school crisis team and knowing what to do. Okay, we'll see if technology works. Okay, no, Rose. Page. Okay. Well, I hate to have it be. Oh, that's the machine all the time. Okay, Jody, we'll have. As Iris was sharing with us earlier, and so eloquently did, that prevention is really where it's at. And certainly if we can do prevention and we can be a part of preventing and helping students and giving them the skills they need in order to handle some of the things that they're having to cope with, and give other students abilities on how to identify and how to respond to their peers. As she said, you know, the peers know more of what's going on out there and are much more engaged and involved in those day-to-day kinds of things, and knowing what's going on inside of our students than we as the adults in our classrooms are. And so in LPS, we have use a program called SOS, Signs of Suicide, and teach that through the health curriculum. And it is such a powerful piece that we really believe has lessened the amount of suicides that we have had within the schools, because they have had the opportunity for their peers to be able to be more aware of what's going on and be able to do some reporting. In the SOS program, they teach kids the importance of acting. And ACT is acknowledging, I know I know that you have a concern, just kind of like we were having in the role play. I'm concerned about you, and showing that you care, reaching out and not being afraid to ask people those tough questions, not being afraid to reach out and be a part of that world and acknowledge right where they're coming from, and then help them to get some support, either them going together to get some help, but telling an adult. Unfortunately, I've had too many crisis responses where we've sat in rooms with students and they said, you know, they talked about this, but I never really thought they'd do it. Or they shared some things and I just thought they were kidding. I didn't think they'd really do this. And now for the rest of their lives, they're dealing with, if I would have, I should have, if I'd only known, and not knowing how to deal with that. And so that puts them at risk. And so we really want to emphasize to students how important it is not to keep those confidences that they certainly know are so important in their friendships of, well, I knew, but I couldn't tell, they'd be mad. Well, they're more than mad now, you know, it's now you can't do anything more about it. And so it's really important to give kids those skills, as well as address it openly in the classroom so that students know, you know, other kids have these kinds of feelings too. And there is someone that's out there. It also gives the opportunity for kids to self-report or share some of the students that they're concerned about privately in a way then that's followed up on immediately by the counselor and a team in the buildings. So it's a really good program. I know that there are many other prevention programs out there, and some of the rest of you may have those involved in your school. But for LPS, that's the one that we used in the middle schools and feel like it's been very beneficial. And I see some heads nodding from some of my peers that are doing that as well. So I do think it's so important to give kids those resources and the skills that you're building to be able to get the help they need. All right, Rose, I'll just kind of give you the sign. Oh, try again, okay. Nope. Okay, all right. So if students don't learn that skill in school, I mean, it is such an essential skill, and it is a skill that can save people's lives. So what better skill can we do but to give students skills that they feel can make a difference for all of them? Unfortunately, we know that we can't be a prevention for everyone. And there are still going to be situations where students take that act, whether that's by an impulsive act or just because they see no other way out of that pain. So it's important for schools to be able to be proactive and not reactive and have a plan. How many of you are in school? How many of you are school people? Okay. And how many of you that are school people have crisis response teams? Great. Okay. So you all have, many of you have that background already and know the importance of having a plan. I'm from a really little town in Nebraska, and for a long time I would go back home and talk to the superintendent and say, don't you think you need a crisis response team? Oh no, that's not going to happen here. We've just got such a small school, and you know, we don't really need that. Until unfortunately they learned the hard way that they did need that. And now have an active team. But I think small schools sometimes feel like, well, you know, we just have so few students and we've got our handle on that, we've got our fingers on everything, and you just can't. That's an impossibility. And so having a plan ready and knowing what you're going to do ahead of time so that you know how to be responsive to the needs of your students is so important. So having that and being able to respond immediately. Technology now has added a whole new perspective to crisis response, because we used to be able to say in schools, you know, call us immediately, we'll activate our team, we'll get there and plan with you, the administrators, counselors, the people that are the key people in working with those students. We'll try to be able to get out the information in a uniformed way so that we have kind of some management of the crisis. But what we're finding now with technology is kids are finding out before the school finds out. I went to a crisis response one day and they called me and I said, do you think anybody knows? And they're like, nope, I don't think anybody knows. We found out about the death after school started, no one knows. As I'm driving up to the school, I see students coming out, and I talked to one student that I knew and I said, you know, where are you going? And he said, that was my best friend, man. And I said, well, how do you know what happened? And he said, my mom texted me and said, Tony died, do you want to go home? You know, I'm like, wow, your mom texted you that your best friend died, and you know, and so now you're out on the street going out without the support of the people that are here to help you. So it's so important that you have that plan ready ahead of time, have people right available, if possible, right within your building so you can activate right away. LPS has 3 teams, and so they have to gather and get there, so that takes us a little bit more time, but it does bring what John Dudley talks about as that non-anxious presence, because many times we aren't emotionally attached to those students, so we can have a little bit different perspective on supporting them and not be grieving ourselves from the loss that we're experiencing. Some of you in smaller towns don't have that benefit and are responding to schools or to students where, you know, this maybe was your neighbor or, you know, your child's best friend, and that makes it much more difficult when you're really caught into that with your own personal emotions too. So important to know where we're coming from and have a plan B. You know, if you're being able to say, gosh, I can't do this one, that's important for your own self-care too, and know that it's all right to set limits and say, you know, I can't do this. But for many of us, it feels good to be able to have a plan and put it in place and feel like you're making a difference and you're helping those students that are really at such a crisis moment. So importance of being honest though and upfront. Certainly you have to clarify the facts first. You have to verify those, you know, speaking to the police or clarifying those to make sure that it's not just the word from somebody being texted or something that you think happened. We've had situations where we were ready to respond and share with the students, and in fact the student had not died yet. They were on life supports and they were waiting for organ transfer, and so it was really important that we didn't tell all the students he's died before the family had really had that information and notified that. So some of those kinds of specifics that you think, oh, we've got it all planned, there's always something in every response that throws it in to make it a little different. But being ready as a team to problem solve that and kind of know the supports that you have in place in your building or within your community to help you through those times. But there certainly are best practices to crisis responses. I know in Nebraska, John Dudley's trained a lot of teams through the ESUs, so that's an important resource that you have, but certainly there are many other school response programs that are available and that you can purchase or be trained in. So just the importance of having a crisis team plan in place is so important. How many, well, we just talked about that, but contact your ESU. Go ahead, Rose, I kind of went through that already. In crisis response, many times what we're doing is bringing students in and giving them an opportunity to process that. And this diagram kind of shows that as they come in, they're starting with information that's just in their heads. The information they got, what they know, the facts that they know, the kinds of things, and giving them a chance to just kind of do that reporting, to share how they knew that student, to talk about, the information they got, because much of what you have to do is also dispelling the rumors and the myths that kind of go around the stories, because many times students don't have all the facts, or if they do, but that telephone game, every time it gets repeated, it gets changed, and many kids are dealing with misinformation. And often, if they don't have the information, they fill in the blanks with their own, and again, it changes the perspective and the story. So giving them a chance to report it out and reflect on that kind of brings them starting to get down into that emotional piece. And helps them to process some of the emotions, some of the feelings, some of the loss that they're experiencing. But the important part of that is also to then be sure to be able to bring them back out on the other side of restoring some of their ability to cope, knowing who their support people are, thinking about how they're going to respond to this, what ways can they offer support to their peers, or how can they reach out to the family, and getting them into thinking things through more again. So you're taking it from head down to heart and kind of right in the guts of things. And you may have kids there just really staying with you in that crisis moment for a long time. And some people, teachers sometimes, they're just using that to get out of class, or whatever it might be. We hear those stories often. But if a student's really in there emoting and needing to have that processing time, give them that opportunity. What better place to be supported? And sometimes they're not even there because of the crisis. They may be there because of some of their own personal issues. But what better place to come, because they know there are people there that care, that will listen. And so give them that opportunity. Just like I was just saying, we always find out many more girlfriends and relationships and different things that come about. Whether that's reality or just within their own perspective, it's still important for them to have that time to process and be supported in. And then before they go out back into class or wherever they're going, to be sure that they are able to talk to you about who do you talk to when you're feeling overwhelmed, and who are your support people, and what would you do, how do you share your emotions, or what are some things that you do for self-care, so that they're back to the head thinking again, but have some things in place for them to be able to have a support of their own, whether it's the support system or some strategies. So important to be ongoing and monitoring. Certainly once we have that, we always identify who are those students that we might see as most vulnerable. Also, certainly giving some training to all staff. Certainly that would hopefully be beforehand, so that the staff can and knows how to support grieving kids in their classroom. But we have some teachers that we'll see often we don't ever have like an all-school assembly to share it. We share it within each individual classroom, so that the teacher or crisis team member can share that on a more personal level, and then they can discuss it and have more of a conversation or a group discussion until they feel like they've processed it enough. Then if those students don't feel like, or that there are still some students that want to continue that, they can go into with the rest of the crisis team or continue that discussion in class. We'll have many teachers that get the response or get the announcement and go, okay, yeah. And we always ask, if anyone feels like they can't do this announcement, let us know. We'll come in and have that conversation with you in your class. We'd be glad to support you in that. And it's like, nope, I can do it. They go into their class, put it down on their desk, close their doors, and get out your books, and don't want to do it. And it's difficult. And so in helping teachers be empowered to do those kinds of things, or at least giving them an out of having some support in doing those kinds of conversations, are important. None of us like to have to be confronted with death, and certainly we don't know the circumstances for those particular teachers. They may have experienced a death recently, they may have related personally to the situation, so we have to understand that, not with judgment, but to help them, empower them to be able to do what they need to do that day. Parent programs is another piece. We talk about in schools, we work with the students, But then they go home, and hopefully those parents know the importance of supporting their kids, keeping them with adults or with other people, not have kids isolated and alone after a crisis response, because it certainly does make all kids more at risk and helps them, parents, to feel more empowered by saying, you know, giving them permission to stay with their kids, hug their kids, talk to their kids, maybe more than they normally do. Hopefully more than they normally do. So important to have those community supports and also have some training going on. So go ahead. We talk about which kids are most vulnerable, and there may be lots of different reasons. Certainly siblings would be, and often they aren't in school if the death has happened prior to the school starting. But we don't ever know about other relationships that students may have, closest friends or students that were also exposed to the suicide, or maybe students that are more vulnerable because of other losses that they have had or other at-risk kinds of behaviors that they're in. Maybe some of those students who are depressed or need other kinds of support. So if you see students especially withdrawn or different in their personality than normal, those are kind of some key pieces to be watching for and making sure. Sorry, I don't have mine. Okay, so some of those things can be predisposing them for depression. You know, if they were close to the person, if they maybe knew about it ahead of time, any of those kinds of things that are listed there. My daughter is down in Oklahoma, and she's going to graduate school. And the plan for the schools in that city are, if we have a crisis, we just call the college, and they send all their counseling students to our school. So unfortunately, they had a student that killed themselves right in school, in the hallways before school started one morning. So they were called and said, get to this school. And she called me in a panic and was like, they haven't trained us, we don't know what to do. And our professor just says, well, you're a counselor, you can do that. You know how to be a counselor. And so I was like, wow, that just feels like that there's other plans. So she's kind of taken that on as a crusade now of getting the kids that are in that program training in crisis response, because it's so important that they know how to respond. And just because you're a counselor doesn't mean you have to have all these skills, or you should have, or are expected to be able to jump in and be the crisis response. So please know where you're at in your level of comfort, and also get the training that might be called upon from you to be able to do those things. But we certainly know that it causes lots of concern for students in many different ways, and so bringing that out and giving training in that would be helpful. I'm going to keep on rolling because I know our time will go fast. Or not. Okay. So it's really important that we're prepared and that we have awareness of what's going on so that we can make a difference. We've talked about many of these, so I'm going to roll through these pretty quickly, but knowing that there are lots of different experiences and different emotions that people will have when they've experienced suicide, and so recognizing that you may see lots of different responses from some of these to also, you know, the mixed emotions, the blame, the self-guilt, some of those kinds of things that are relevant to many situations, but certainly are a part of suicide. You also hear many students questioning and asking lots of things about, you know, I should have known, or why didn't I know about that? It's all my fault. Why are the questions? And we may not have answers to those, and that's something that families struggle with over and over, is they don't have the answers to that, and that's what makes oftentimes suicide such a difficult thing to deal with, because there aren't always, you know, people assume, oh, they'll have left a note and that'll explain it all. It doesn't, and many times they don't leave a note, but even if they do, it doesn't explain that there are many other pieces to the puzzle that we're trying to make sense of. So important to just be able to listen and to empathize and to be able to support them in those questions. Even though we know we don't have the answers to them, it's still important for them to express them and for them to get them out and to question. And even if they're feeling some guilt, it's all right to let them feel whatever they're feeling. We don't want to take it away and say, oh, you shouldn't feel guilty. It's not your fault. You couldn't have done anything about it. Hopefully they will get to that as they process their emotions, but we don't want to take away any of the feelings that they have an opportunity to express to you. So allow them to feel the feelings and just be able to get it all out. So we know that challenges of suicide, there's lots of different things, and I think I was talking to a mom that I'm working with right now, and she said, you know, after my son's suicide, I felt like that was my identity. And whenever people saw me, they always thought of that. And so I stayed by myself a lot. I didn't go out into the community. I didn't go do things. And I didn't even want to go to my job, because she said I felt like every time they looked at me, they'd say, oh, that's that poor mom. And thinking, having that link to my identity. So she said it's taken me a long time to be able to feel comfortable going out and realizing I am me. I am not my son's behaviors. I am me. I loved my son. My son loved me. I know that he was just in a lot of pain and didn't know another way out. And so I can't blame him, but I can't blame myself either. And it's taken her a long time to get to that point. But that shame or feeling like other people are judging you based on that is a piece that those families deal with often. And oftentimes friends do as well, because they feel like that I wish I would have known kinds of piece. So important that we give them the social support. And that's why having some groups and having some other kinds of opportunities for those families is essential. Because many times, you know, if someone has cancer or someone has a death through an accident, lots of people rally and bring food and really support others. But suicide is one of those sometimes that people don't know how to support. They're afraid they'll say the wrong thing, and so they stay away. And what message is that to the families? Is that nobody cares, or people kind of treat us differently than the others. And so really important that we reach out. Someone asked, does Mourning Hope have separate groups just for suicide? And sometimes it's important for them to have a link to another person who has been through that, so that they can kind of make that connection and feel like they're relating to. But in talking to lots of other experts in grief in different centers, they've said, you know, by having just a separate group, it kind of still stigmatizes them and saying they're not the same as anyone else. And so we really combine all of our grief groups. And it's amazing for kids when they come together and they share their stories, whether it's grandpa dying or whether it's mom dying, and whether it's from a long-term illness or suicide or an accident. They all find so many common denominators that they have in the feelings that they have, the experiences that they're having now after the death, that the way they died is one component, but it's not the whole picture. And it's not the whole piece for them. And so it helps normalize what they're going through. Doesn't minimize what they've gone through, but it helps to normalize that, you know, I'm not so weird. You know, these people are feeling some of those same things, and they didn't go through this. So some of ours are the same. So it's helpful to have that and know that the social supports are really important, and don't hesitate to reach out to those if you know someone who's experienced a suicide. And certainly don't feel like that there has to be a timeline on that. Reach out at any time, even if it's been months, even if it's been years. If you know that there's a significant date or their birth date, or you know that there is that this is a special time for this family, maybe they're having, you know, special occasion, they're going to miss that person. And so reaching out to them and talking about it and acknowledging it, certainly they're thinking about it. So it's important to acknowledge that as well. Use the person's name. All of those kinds of things that we do with normal grief as we support others, we want to do and keep it the same when you're supporting someone who's gone through a suicide. We've kind of gone through some of those, I think, too. So one of the things Iris talked about is the terms we use, using commit suicide, as she spoke about, making it more of a crime than really the action. And so catching ourselves, and that's really hard to do because that's been a way people have framed it for a long time, but really trying to say died by suicide or died from suicide instead, because that helps, again, those family members feel like it's not that they, you know, as a family have that stigma or a sin. So in talking to kids and needing the support that they have, we want to make sure that we see that they don't take on that blame or feel like they should have done something different, but helping them to understand that we're not judging them, that we're all a part of this and can support them in that same way. Some of the ways that children grieve differently than adults is we seem to have that there are some major pieces for kids when they go through it is, did I cause this to happen? And again, for some kids, they need to be able to process that and feel like, you know, I did kind of know this was going to happen, and if I would have done something, this might be different. Helping them process that, supporting them in that, and not just, oh, it's not your fault, but just allowing them to work through that. Will it happen to me? And who will take care of me now? Now, certainly knowing that that may be referring to parents' death as well as siblings and other people in their classrooms. But those seem to be some of the three main concerns of children's grief compared to adult grief that we have to understand and recognize. Knowing that kids grieve as who they are, developmentally, there's going to be a big difference in how they respond to grief. And so I put in your handout a handout about developmental stages of grief, and knowing that there will be different ages that they have different understandings and different beliefs about what happens. And certainly in this packet there are lots of pieces of information that I encourage you to share with your coworkers, the other teachers in your building, even using it as part of an in-service kind of training for them so that they feel more prepared in coping with that. Not just on the topic of suicide, but knowing that you have students who are dealing with losses of all kinds daily, but death frequently. And so kids grieve all different kinds of losses, and we need to acknowledge that and help support them in that. But certainly when it's a death, and especially when it's a death of suicide, we want to be sure that we're there and supporting them at age-appropriate ways. So that handout will kind of help you to know that there are different ways kids understand and what they understand about it, and then what a caring adult can do for them at that age so that they can really be supported in that role. Knowing that that kids grieve in waves, it may come in and out, and you may share with a student or your classroom what happened, and if it's in, again, this is just death overall, but if it's in a student, when you talk to them and you share it, they may say, okay, and then, do you know what's for lunch today? Or how soon is recess? And this is elementary school, but middle schoolers and high schoolers can be just as abstract, and you sharing some information, and then they pop out into something very random in your mind. You're thinking, geez, didn't I explain this well enough? Or do they not understand what I said? Or maybe they weren't as close to this person or didn't know this person, and so they're not responding in the way you think. But kids have a shut-off valve in their grief that adults do not. And so they take in only as much as they can handle for a short period of time, and then they shut it off and they go to their own world of what other kinds of things are going on for them, and maybe it's recess soon, or maybe their stomach's growling, or whatever it is, to take a break from that emotionally. They have that ability. Unfortunately, adults don't, and sometimes we get immersed in it, and we just aren't able to pull ourselves out of that grief or where we're at with that. But for kids, they kind of take it on, and then they shut it off, and they go out and play, and they may have all kinds of fun and laughter, and then come in with lots of emotion or lots of questions. That's really normal. And we teach kids about that at Mourning Hope, talking about it being like the waves of an ocean. Now, not everyone's been to an ocean, but many kids have been to a wave pool by now, and so they know that sometimes you can prepare yourself and brace yourself for a one coming, and in death, that may be a holiday or an anniversary date or something that is coming ahead, and you can prepare yourself for it and think, okay, and you make it through and you think, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought, and then whoosh, it catches you from behind, or it catches you on another one that you didn't expect. Maybe it's a song that you heard on the radio, maybe it's driving past a place that you used to go, maybe it's, whatever it may be, a smell, any of those kinds of things that tip our senses to trigger some more memories, brings all that back. And so for kids, those and adults, those kinds of things come in waves, and they just come unexpectedly. And sometimes parents are really in tune to it when they have a wave coming, or they know that they're going through a big wave right then. And they'll call us at Mourning Hope and say, oh, we really need to come in. We need to be in a group because our child's having a lot of trouble in school, or they're failing, or they're talking about dropping out, or whatever it might be. So we're like, okay, we have a group starting, in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And so we send them out the information, and the few days before group starts, we'll call them to make sure that they know how to get to our center. And they'll go, you know what, everything's okay now. So I don't think we need it. I think everything's better. They haven't talked about it in a few days, so we're not going to bring it up. So they're kind of just riding the waves, instead of realizing that if they can teach their kids skills on how to handle when the waves come, and how to ride those waves, and how to handle all the emotions that are overwhelming to them, they'll be able to then, when the next wave comes, handle that without a crisis, without going to, oh no, what's going to happen this time? So teaching the parents, teaching the kids, and having them as a family work that together. So even as a school, having some education components for the parents as well is really important to give them some tools. We're working with the students, but how important it is, or those of you who are in maybe community agencies, to be able to offer parents some skills on how to help their kids through grief. And again, our kids grieve for lots of reasons. You know, losing the basketball game seems pretty minor, but if you're the star player and you miss that final throw, that can be pretty devastating. You know, or all those kinds of things that as adults we can look back, perspectives on relationships and things, and go, oh, but you know, lots of fish in the sea, all those things, you know, that are kind of cliches that people give to comfort. And for kids, when they're right in the moment, that's huge. But certainly, and as Iris pointed out, sometimes just that loss can be the final drop that takes them over. And so we want to give them some coping strategies in dealing with all kinds of losses so that they are able to handle that, and certainly put it into place when they have these kinds of situations happening in their school. So we know that kids regress. You may see, and I think that was in the back, but that's fine. Kids regress into other kinds of behaviors. Kids' grief comes out in their behaviors. So if you're working with young people, elementary age, you may see a lot more behaviors that are more childlike than you expected. In fact, some kids go back to sucking their thumb or rocking or doing all kinds of things that really were way before that in their developmental, but they go back to a safer time in their life. So important for us to recognize that and just nurture them and give them the extra love and support that they know, because you can chart their healing by seeing when they start feeling more secure, some of those kinds of behaviors go out. Even parents will say, oh, they can't sleep by themselves anymore, or they want to, you know, have extra lights on in the room. All those kinds of things are important for us to recognize and not shame them for, but help them understand that's part of the grieving process that they can work through. So important for parents to have a handle on what kinds of things are appropriate. Even teenagers will regress and maybe want to have more time with family, or maybe just want to snuggle up, you know, more than they maybe have before. Maybe have those extra hugs. And you think, gosh, you know, this is really unusual. This is my kid who kind of wants me to drop him off and go, you know, drive away 3 blocks before he'll go down the street, not wanting me to be around. But they need that support, they need that extra TLC, and we want to give parents permission to do that, because sometimes they think, oh, they're getting their support with their peers, you know, and developmentally, typically, you know, there's that age where they go more to their peers than they do to their parents for different kinds of supports. But at this point, their peers don't know how to handle this any more than they do. So their peers kind of are trying to do their own thing as well. So having adults be there to be their models, to be supporting them in their grief, and allowing them to feel the feelings, whether that's anger, whether that's fear, sadness, whatever it may be, and however they express it, to give them permission to do that is so important. Kids will re-grieve their losses, and so maybe they have had a death that you don't even know about previously in their life, and now they're in your class as maybe a sophomore, and you're thinking, why is this kid really in a funk, and there's a different kind of tone to them right now. What's going on? And maybe what you don't know is that 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was a really significant death or loss in their family, or in their life at least, and you're not aware of that to support them. So how do we know that? We can't know that about every student, everything that goes on, but certainly communicating those kinds of things, being in touch with families so that if you notice that, to be able to call and say, I've kind of noticed this about, you know, Sue, what do you think? Is there anything that you can tell me to fill me in on what's going on so that I can kind of help support her better? And they may share that then, or just at least having that awareness, they can continue to support them as well at home. So really important, and recognizing that it's a process. It's a lifelong process, and it's something that you go through. You aren't going to grieve, and we have to help kids know you aren't going to feel this intense grief your whole life, but you're going to grieve and re-grieve throughout your entire life. So you're not doing it wrong if it comes back at different times and resurfaces and comes back up again and it feels really hard. That's okay, that's part of this, and we need to recognize that and support them in it. Instead of, aren't you over that yet? Gosh, that was a long time ago. Or I had one teacher tell students, we're done with this grief stuff now. We got to get on to class. you know, and so it's like, yeah, really? We don't know. And I know, gosh, their subject matter is really important to them, and those kinds of things are just kind of come out of our mouths sometimes without really having it register in what we're saying. But so important we teach our teachers how to respond, because they're the models to our students, and they're with them many times more hours of the day than their parents are. So we can't just leave this to someone. We have to be the ones to take that effort and to make that happen in their lives. Certainly we know adolescence is that time. How many of you work with adolescents? That middle school kind of age? Oof, yeah. When I was first going to be a middle school counselor, I thought, really, do I want to go there with those kids? Because I had been working in the elementary, and it was like, that's a lot safer. But you know, when you get in there, you'll love them, and it's great. It was a great time. But there's lots of things changing in their lives all the time. Everything's changing. And teenagers too. It's not just middle school, but in high school as well. You know, their friendships change, relationships change, all those kinds of things that are listed there, all of those things changing. And so with all of that going on, there are lots of different losses and lots of confusion and lots of ways that they need support. So not only through a loss, all the time, but certainly recognizing there are other losses that they're grieving, and that can be the final drop. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the skills that they can cope with and handle those things. Some of the things that make this so SCIP related, and when I've done SCIP trainings before, I'm like, these are some of the kinds of things that you'll notice in students who are grieving that you may not even know they're grieving, because maybe uncle, you know, died from suicide in a different state, and you don't even know that's happened. But these may be some of the things that you're noticing in class. You know, there's more anxiety, that you can tell they're yawning, their sleep patterns are changing, maybe they're not eating as much or eating a lot more, those kinds of things. Or there's certainly noticing in relationships changing or other kinds of things. So recognizing that and seeing those things that are kind of those warning signs to help us know, because those are the common responses to kids grieving. That's not making that they are suicidal. That's saying that's a normal grief response for kids, is to have all those top pieces. And what do they need is that unconditional love and support and some understanding and some opportunity to express what's going on inside of them without the judgments of others of, gosh, that was a long time ago, aren't you over it? You know, or deciding for them their timeline or the expectation they should be done grieving, because it is something we have to help teach and give permission that it's going to be there your whole life. It's not going to hurt as intensely, but it's going to be a part of who you are because you love that person. They'll always be connected to you, and so it's going to continue to be a part of your life. So schools are the absolute ideal environment to support them. As I said, they're with us more often than other people, and so we need to be the ones to give them the support and environment that can be there. They spend that time with us, they're supported, they know us, they trust us, and they can be supported as a whole class or individually as well. So some of the things that why it's maybe more important that as a school we support them, not more important than families, but some reasons why families can't do it the same, is sometimes they need that person that's not attached. Sometimes they have questions, sometimes they have things that they're thinking about or wondering, but they don't want to ask someone that's in their family that's maybe grieving that same loss because they don't want to trigger more. Kids are very protective of their adults in their lives, and so they don't want to say something that may make mom really anxious or may make them worry or may set off some alarms for them that then they won't ever get to go out of the house again, you know. So they want to ask those questions, but who can they ask? So school's a safe place to be able to do that. They have a little bit of that distance, so they're not quite so bound with that emotion, and so that they aren't trying to please and they aren't trying to perform in a certain way that they maybe feel like their parents think of that they should. And certainly we are aware of who they are day to day. So it's easy for us to be able to say, gosh, in October, this is how they were. Now in March, this is how they are. There's a change. We need to do something about this. We need to address this in some way because they've changed. And so are those signs, maybe signs that they're grieving, maybe signs that there's depression, maybe signs that they're thinking about some things that we need to help them process and help them cope with in a positive way. And it's certainly another way for us to be able to educate parents, because parents will come to school. Parents pick up those kinds of handouts that we give them, and encouraging them from the educator's standpoint is hopefully a way to teach them and to be able to do that. So helping counselors, teachers, nurses, all those people that are in their lives in the schools to provide that kind of support gives us a better chance to be taking advantage of those teachable moments, taking an opportunity to be a part of their life in a significant way, noticing those things and making a difference. I'm not going to read to you all these things that are on there, but just as a way for you to kind of see, these are some of the ways that teachers can make a difference, and that counselors and the nurses that are in their lives can focus on those things and identify that and make the referrals that they need in order to get some support. So less efforts in helping these efforts be less isolated, help them succeed academically, talk with them and receive the support they need, and develop healthy coping skills. As I said earlier, that's the most important part. So connecting with students, how do you do that? What are some ways that you connect? What are some ways that you reach out to kids? What are some ways that you do that?
Through classroom guidance.
Classroom guidance. Okay, some activities to kind of talk more about the affective kinds of roles and things that are going on in their lives. What else? Class meetings some teachers have to be able to do that. Sometimes just calling them in and saying, gosh, I've noticed this about you. What else do you do to make those connections with kids?
Talk to them about their schedule.
Talk to them, have the appointment be about their schedule. I want to talk to you about your schedule. But then once you get them in, you've got that captive audience to be able to say, you know, I've noticed this about you too. Tell me more about what's going on for that. Yeah, very important that, so that they, when they go back and they say, what did the counselor want to talk to you about? They can say, oh, she just want to check my schedule. Yeah, and that makes it more normalized, but yet certainly knowing that that's their in to do that. So always giving kids their out to be able to not have to confide to their friends if they're not ready to do that. What other ways do you make contact?
Be at lunch,
Yeah.
lunch duty and stuff like that.
Right.
Kids.
Make those other connections. It's not just you and the teacher role, but to have that personal relationship with them. Be at lunch, go to their activities sometimes, or be engaged in their life a little bit more. Show that interest. So the more that we can do that, the more it helps them see we care, and it helps them to gain some life skills that they're going to need for the rest of the time. So how do you do that? Well, there's a whole list of things, but certainly one of the most important things is being honest. Sometimes, especially with suicide, we don't want to always share with kids, and we've had families that come to Mourning Hope, and the parent that'll bring them say, you know, their brother died from suicide, but we haven't told them that. They think they just were in an accident. And so we have to talk a lot about, with that family, about, you know, the importance of kids building trust with you as a family. And they can deal with what they know. They can't deal with what they don't know. And so they're all of a sudden thinking accident, and in their mind they have it pictured. And 2 years down the road, 10 years down the road, when a cousin says something about their brother, or somebody down the street says, oh, too bad this happened, or in the bullying situations throws it out at them, and then they feel like, gosh, the life I've lived has been a lie this whole time. And, you know, if I would have only had the information at the time. So giving them the factual information says, I trust you with this. I know you can handle it. I know that we can together work through this, and we want you to know the truth. And so that's really important in building those relationships. And if you have families that you're working with that are debating about that, I really urge you that they're honest with their kids, because honesty is the way to build those relationships. And parents, as bless their hearts, they want to protect their kids, but it's not really the way that you want to go about it, by making up a story that in the end it's going to come out sometime down the road. Using concrete language, we've talked about a little bit in making sure that they understand developmentally where they're at, but sometimes we, again, want to cushion it. We want to pat it a little bit, and we want to just say, well, they passed away, or we've lost them. Well, for young kids, if you've lost them, why aren't you out looking for them, you know? And if they've passed away, well, I know how you pass the P's. I studied to pass this test, but I don't know how you pass away. And how do you get there? What, you know, what's involved in that? And so it's confusing to them, where they know about died. They know, they've seen something be dead, and they get that. And so it's concrete, they need to understand that. And just the same, you know, I think it's sometimes just more comfortable for adults to be able to say, oh, they passed on. But we got to call it as it is. They died, and so we need to deal with it in that factual way. Kids are always going to have questions, and they may have a lot of questions at first, or they may have a lot of the same questions over and over and over. So it's important that you're patient with them and are able to just continue to address those, because if you can be the person they come to, then they will know that they're building that trusting relationship with you, and you'll answer their questions honestly. And that's a really key piece. Being available, just as you said, in all different places and in all different ways, you know, just letting them know that you're around. And when kids first come back to school after they've experienced the death, to be sure that we acknowledge that in some way. Now, you don't have to bring it up in class. In fact, I would hope that you don't bring it up in front of the whole class, but talk to them ahead of time. You know, in a small town, most of the time, kids already know about what happened, and so they're going to realize that it's not a new story for them. But other times, in other schools, in a city system, they may not know what's happened. And would you like to share this information with your class? Would you like to share what your experience has been and what you've gone through while you've been gone? Or would you just like to have us go on with class as normal? And let them have some control in a situation they have had no control over at all. It gives them a little power, and it gives them an opportunity to make some decisions in some things that, like I said, most of the time it's an adult world, and so they have not been as much a part of that. So giving them some options. Also, always letting them know you're around and you've missed them. In high school, you don't have to do it as a class thing, but just catching them in the hall and saying, gosh, missed you, or, you know, sure been thinking about you a lot. Just so that they know that you know and that you're an open door. If there's ever time you need to talk, I'm sure here to listen. You don't have to make it a big thing. You don't have to have a sit-down conversation with them, but just being sure that you touch base with them periodically and checking in with them builds that relationship and helps them know that they have somebody there that cares. So many times kids from Mourning Hope will come and they say, you know, the hardest day that I experienced wasn't the day I found out they died. It was the day I had to go back to school. Because I went back to school and my life had been turned upside down, and everybody else went on like nothing had happened, and their lives were all just fine, and they never even acknowledged it. And I just felt so alone. So reaching out to those kids and helping them know, I care, I know, I'm here for you, and giving them that opportunity to get that support whenever it may need to be for them. Also recognizing that we may need to make adjustments. You know, I know our class is important, but I had a student whose dad died, and she was a straight A student and very scholarly, but she just could not focus when she was reading. And she had some book reports that were due, she had some tests coming up that she had missed, and her teachers were kind of giving her some leeway, but they were like, but we still need to get them done by this time. And she's like, I sit down and start to read, and I get through the words, but I have no idea what I was reading. And I just, you know, and so she was so stressed that she was almost hyperventilating at times because she just didn't know how to handle it, because she was used to being top. And now she was, you know, probably coming in with B's and C's, but that was not okay for her, and it caused her a lot of anxiety. And so we need to be the ones that are flexible, and we need to be able to adjust that and communicate to the teachers that work with her, or whomever it is, that we need to give them some leeway. We need to give some slack. That doesn't mean just excuse everything from them that they don't have to learn, because certainly we know some of those things are building blocks that are very essential. But cutting down some of those assignments, allowing them to have their own timetable of completion, some of those things we need to have permission to do and to give others permission to do, because otherwise we kind of get caught in our own little world and don't make those connections for kids. Listen, listen, listen. And Iris said that earlier, and I will say it again, and I wrote it 3 times, because that is absolutely the most important piece, to be there to listen. They need to know you care, and allowing them to express it in whatever way they can, but being there. Some of the other things, I said be resourceful. There are lots of different materials that are available to have discussions with kids and classes. There are lots of books for little kids that we certainly have used, even, I can't pull it out, here it is, to discuss even with the youngest kids about what death is, and explaining that everything that lives dies, and having some resources about that. It's important that kids don't just find out about loss and death when they've had a traumatic loss of their own. You know, it's important that they have, Ellen Wolfeld will talk about, don't make one big tell-all, where they have to learn everything about death in once when it's a person closest to them. It's it's overload. They can't comprehend all of that, and they can't understand what's going on. So then it complicates their grief a lot more. So giving them some understanding, and that's why it's so beautiful to have, life cycles and all those kinds of things in our science curriculum, and lots of ways you can tie grief and death into the curriculum that you're doing throughout. So not to be afraid to approach that subject and tackle some of those subjects, because that will make it then so that kids go, oh, this was, and it starts making connections for them. I even encourage families or parents to take their kids to a funeral of someone that they aren't real closely connected to. Maybe it's an elderly relative or someone that they didn't know as well, so that they can experience what a funeral's like, and this is what you'll see, and this is what you'll smell, and this is what you'll hear people saying and doing, and kids are like, well, why do they have a party afterwards? That's really disrespectful, because somebody died, we're sad, and now they're having a party and laughing. Well, that's part of the process, as a way to support kids or support people of the family, is when you can be able to talk about memories and share those things. So when kids can understand that, I even know that, when I was in college, there was people in college that had never been to a funeral before. And I grew up in a little town where you went to lots of them because you were related to half the people, and so you always went to funerals. And so that was kind of a normal process. But some kids had never been. They didn't know what to expect. And we had a really good friend die, and they were like, well, what do you do at a funeral? What do you wear? Those kinds of things. Again, some learning for kids to know appropriate funeral etiquette, behavior, those kinds of things, so that they know, and it's just not so overwhelming, so that they can be tuned in then to what's going on inside their hearts, instead of just all the logistics of what's going on. So allowing them to have some of those things, to be resourceful, to allow them to take the lead, and to talk to the person about the person who's died, using their name, asking them questions, even talking about, I was thinking about your brother the other day, and this just reminded me of him, and talking about it. Because I think another fear that families have is that once they die, everyone will forget about them, and that they won't even exist anymore for anyone else. And they know how significant they've been in their life, but because they aren't here now, that they'll have been forgotten. So the more we can talk about them, bring up memories, talk about different experiences that you've had with them, helps to clarify to them, you do remember, you did care, or you do still care. And so that's a heartwarming thing for them as well. I talked about the making adjustments already, and recognizing those grief responses. Nobody does it the same. It's like your thumbprint. Everyone is unique in their own person, and so they're going to be unique in their grief. And so it's very important that we recognize that and know that, one person's going to come out with anger, another person's going to come out with tears, another person's going to be very quiet and withdrawn. Different ways that people grieve. And so we don't want to jump to, oh, that person's at risk because they're quiet, or this person's not because they're talking a lot. Doesn't mean that one is less than the other, but it's a change in their normal behaviors that we want to kind of monitor more. But recognizing each person's grief is unique. And even siblings or best friends who've had their best friend die, they're going to grieve differently based on their relationship with that person, based on the support systems that they have personally, based on the circumstances of the death, based on their gender, based on their developmental abilities and understanding of what's happened, the religious or rituals and traditions that they've participated in, any previous losses that they've experienced. There are lots of different things, and their personality style is a big piece of that. So all of those different kinds of things are wrapped together to make their grief different than everyone else's. Even within the same family, even within the same friendship group that you may think, oh, these guys are all the same. They are so much the same. They're going to respond the same. Not true. They're all going to have those different elements to it. So important that we just really allow it to be their own. I think one of the biggest things is being a model, and certainly as adults in their life, you are a model to them. And you are a model in lots of different ways, but you're also a model in how you grieve. And I know on crisis response, sometimes the teachers would say, oh, I don't think I can read this because I'll cry. And we're like, that's okay. This is really sad. It's okay to cry. And in fact, it's healthy for them to see that you cared about your student that much that you would cry because they aren't here. And that you would share that with them is saying that you value their relationship and you trust them. And you want them to trust you you can give that same. And it's a modeling kind of way. Not that you all have to cry, that's not what I'm saying. But if you're afraid you will, give yourself permission to just feel the feelings you're feeling and allow them to be expressed. Sometimes if kids get the message, okay, this is what happened, any questions? Anybody have any concerns, or anybody need to go to the crisis team, talk about their feelings? Okay, let's get out, this book or whatever. It really emphasizes to them, shut down, we don't talk about it, this isn't something safe. And so that's the message that they get, even though it hasn't really been said in so many words. But they get that message loud and clear, and so it doesn't make it okay to either talk to that teacher or person, or it also doesn't make it safe to really even share your emotions, because you don't know who else feels that way. So really important to model and to be kind of aware of where you're at. If this has been something that you've related to closely to your own life, recognize that and ask for support in that. I had a situation once when a student came to me. She was in elementary school and I was a counselor, and she said, my grandma died and I was planning to not be here tomorrow. And I said, yeah, I heard that, and I'm sorry that that's happened. And we kind of talked a little about her grandma, and she said, but I thought I was okay with this, but my teacher said, oh, you aren't going to go look at her when she's dead, are you? And she said, I thought I was going to, my mom kind of told me what we're going to do, and that's what it was going to be, but now I don't know that I want to do that. I don't think I should, because my teacher said no. And so we had to talk through that, and then I talked to the teacher later, and she said, well, I would never go do that. She said, when I was younger, I was forced to kiss my aunt after she had died, and we had to go through and say our goodbyes, and everybody had to kiss them. And she said, that was just awful, and I'll never go through that again, and I don't think anybody should have to. Well, for that person, that was her experience, and certainly I understand that she wasn't prepared appropriately for that, and that was probably very shocking to think she was going to kiss this and she was kissing this, and it felt different, and it was scary to her. But for her to project that on her student 30 years later, she had to realize what a model she is and what an impact her words make on her students. And so very important that we assess, where am I at with things, because we don't ever know when it's going to have to be called up. And so when we know that, I've experienced this, then, as Iris said, getting some support, getting some counseling, or talking about it at least with someone is important, so that we kind of know and can be the positive models that our kids are needing us to be. And remembering this is a lifelong journey, because we sometimes put limits on that for adults as well as kids. Important to offer hope and helping them know they aren't always going to feel this way. When kids go through Mourning Hope, we give them rocks, just like Iris brought out today. We give them a little bag of 3 rocks, and the rocks are different. One of them's really rough and jagged. It's kind of like that crushed rock that you see on driveways. It's just really sharp, and it has lots of points and cracks, and we talk about that when they came to group, it was like that. Their life had been shattered, and it felt really rough and jagged, and it was hard to handle, and it felt really uncomfortable. But as they went through group and went through things, if you know anything about rock tumbling, you know that it's a process, and it's a long process. And you kind of put your rocks in this tumbler. If anybody had tumblers? And my kids went through many tumblers, because it takes such a long time. It's such a long process, and they just tumble around and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And when you dump out that grit and you see the next stage, they're smoother. They're kind of, the edges have worn off. And so we talked to them about, in group, what they've gone through in what they did, the experiences that they shared, the activities that we did, help them to rub off some of the roughness, some of the sharpness of their grief. And so now, hopefully, it's maybe just a little easier to hold on to, it's a little easier to hold, it's a little softer in their life, but there's still some cracks, there's still, still not pretty, but it's an improvement, and we want to show them that hope and that there's growth. The third rock is a polished rock. It's a bright, shiny one, like some of the ones that are in here. And we talked to them about it being a process, that this rock started out like this. But the process of tumbling over and over and over, processed to this, ended with this. And that the process of going through this grief is they're tumbling through all of those emotions, and that there is hope for a bright, shiny future for happiness and laughter and joy in their life. Now, at that moment, they aren't believing that they'll ever laugh again or that they'll ever have some, fun times in their families. But knowing that it's just a process and you continue to keep tumbling and working through it, and that is the process. So giving them hope and helping them know that. Always remembering, we talked about the names, and encouraging healthy ways, giving them lots of opportunities. And this you can do in your classrooms too. In fact, when there's a death, I really encourage you to allow your kids to write, to journal, to make cards for the family, or to express that. It's a life skill that we can teach kids as adults. We send sympathy cards, teaching kids what that is, helping even high school kids know what kinds of things do you write. What kinds of ways can you reach out? What are some things that you can say to someone? And making cards or writing cards and doing that. Also allowing them some journaling time, because it's going to affect each student differently. So allowing them some time to write and process that, not grading it, but collecting it so that they know it's valuable. They can mark it if they don't want it read. But the other thing I would caution about journaling is sometimes we have teachers that journal regularly on a regular basis and really build a really close relationship with their teachers and share a lot of things. And it takes a lot of time to build the confidence in those teachers to know, you can't tell kids that you won't ever share what you're writing, because sometimes some of the things that they're writing about, you need to get help for them. And I know that for some teachers, they value that relationship with that student, and they don't want to allow that confidence or to break that confidence that the student is sharing. But it's really important that we don't give kids that false impression, so that, then you change that relationship on them. But let them know, if they've written something, to meet with them and say, this is really concerning. And so these are some things you talk about, just like the ACT, and then get them some support. Because obviously, just like friends, we don't want teachers to hold on to information that could put kids at risk just because you're valuing that relationship. You want to value the relationship that's living. And so certainly make sure that those boundaries are there. Drawing, painting, all kinds of things are ways to express that. And probably most of all, being there. Being a part of it, if you can attend a service, or it's really important to kids that someone from their school has been at the funeral, or that has been at the visitation, or has stopped at the family's house, or has, kids will bring to group packets of cards, and they're like, look, my classmates made these for me while I was gone. Those are such valued possessions for them, because it shows that other people care about me. In the hardest time of my life, people were thinking of me and helping me through this. And so, doing those kinds of things, but being there and allowing kids to be a part of what's going on is so important. But giving them some opportunities to see you caring about them is so important. Doing all of these things is what we really call companioning. And if you ever visit our Mourning Hope Grief Center, which is on the edge of Wesleyan campus, it's 4919 Baldwin Avenue. We have a big old house. And one wall of our house says the word companioning on it. And companioning is just walking alongside someone. It's not leading them, not being led, but allowing them to just be there and walk with them. Being truly present with their pain. It's not about taking it away or fixing it. It's about being there. It's about being fully present to listen with patience, acceptance, and hope. And it's about being curious and less about our own knowledge and expertise, but about what's going on within them. And it's about being still, not being like, we got to push through this, we got to get done, we got to move on. We have to just be there for them. Listening with your heart, not analyzing with your head. We don't have to have the answers. We need to just be there for them and allow them to teach us. And I think that's the biggest piece. Allow them to teach us. We talk about, Ellen Wolfelt really has talked about companioning, saying you invite them to dance, but you allow them to lead. Now, remember, I was in the middle school, so our dances were kind of like this, and that's not quite the image that I have in my mind of this, but allowing them to dance as inviting, but allowing them to lead, inviting them to dance. So you're right there with them. You're right there supporting them in every move they make. You're right there with them, but you don't push them past what they're ready to do. You don't expect something of them that they can't accomplish at that point. But you just allow them to teach you. And younger kids will teach you through their behaviors. Many times, they will act it out, or through their play. Sometimes teachers will come in and say, they're burying like all kinds of things out on the playground. This is not normal. And we're like, yeah, it is normal. Kids work out what's going on in their lives. They try to make sense of it through their play. So young kids work it through in that way. Older kids work it through with their peers and talk about it, or on the basketball court, or wherever it might be. They need to have that opportunity to get out that energy, and you need to be able to just be there and acknowledge how they are and what they're trying to teach you. How many of you have groups? You can go on to the next one. Support groups in your schools? Do you have groups? Anybody else? Okay. If you don't have, I would encourage you to do that. It is a way for them not to feel so alone and isolated. It's giving them a chance to see there are other kids who can relate, who get it, who are much the same as me. And it may not be because they've had a suicide, but it may be because they have some of the same feelings I do about the death that they've experienced. And so coming together and allowing that. Now, some schools will say, oh, we don't want to stir all that up while they're at school, and so we're going to let that be, someplace else. And I understand what they're saying in that it does bring some emotion out sometimes in sharing that, but it gives those kids a support system to relate to. It builds a relationship with the facilitators of that group along with those students. It gives them a place to come for support. And it also gives them some places that they go, gosh, even at school they care about those things. And if teachers know that all those other indicators earlier were, they can't concentrate, they're not sleeping well, and all those kinds of things, if they can go to a group and process some of that and share some of that and be able to get it out and express it, they're going to be able to get back into that routine of focusing and being with them in class much more quickly, because that's part of that growth through their grief. So encouraging you to consider doing some groups, and I know SCIP has done some trainings in facilitation skills and materials. There are a lot of materials out there now that weren't out there a long time ago, but there's lots of good resources that you can get for grief curriculum. So I'd encourage you to do that, especially if you don't have a community support program in your community or within very close driving distance, because it's really important that kids get that kind of support from others, and that they know that they're not alone and that others can relate and have experienced the same thing. So recognizing that support groups decrease that sense of isolation, as I said, improves their focus, gives them less resistance to talking about it and what's going on, increases their communication, and decreases some of the other symptoms that they may be expressing. It's really valuable and worth your time. I shared with you a little bit about Mourning Hope earlier, but just to kind of summarize that, and you can go on to the next one. We have lots of different programs. So I said when we started we were a teen program. We've added the other ages as well, but in addition to that, we have the young adult group now that's 18 through 30s. We also have school-based groups that are actually starting today. In some of the schools we got a grant, and so some of our schools were selected to be able to be pilot schools, and we're running groups within the school. So if you're an LPS and that's something you're interested in, or even if you're not within LPS but within somewhat surrounding area, we're doing school-based groups, and hopefully the pilot goes well, and we'll continue next year with doing more of those, because we know as counselors our time is very limited, and not everyone feels comfortable doing grief kinds of groups, as well as we have so many other things that have been added to our plates as counselors that sometimes groups is one of those things that kind of gets pulled off. And so we see the importance and the value of them so much that we're coming to the schools to do those. We also have some special events where we bring artists in from the community, and kids get to express their grief through the different art mediums. We have a reunion. Holiday Hope is an event during the holiday kind of times, a retreat. Hearts of Hope is for the families who have someone seriously ill, and we do that on a little bit more of an individual basis, but we companion them as they go through the illness, and usually leading up to the death of that family and aftercare. So that's more of an individual basis. We also have a resource library that many of these resources came from, so if you're looking for some books and you think, gosh, the bookstores don't really have these, our school library doesn't have these, where can I get them? You can certainly check them out at Mourning Hope for your use use in the classroom. But we also got a grant recently that we are providing a backpack of grief materials to every elementary school in Lincoln. And so there'll be a backpack, or actually 2 backpacks that go to every school that will have materials like these kinds of books in them. And they'll be of all different levels. So even though it may be an elementary student that's checking it out, we know that there may be other age students in the home. And so they'll get the materials for them, but they may have books also for siblings that are in middle school and high school, and some materials for the adults in how to support their grieving kids. So that's part of our mission, and we believe in educating the community, and so that's a way that we're trying to do that. So if you're in an LPS elementary, for right now, that's what the grant covered, and so you might be looking for those backpacks. We also do trainings and different kinds of opportunities for internships, so we have lots of ways that we reach out. There are no fees, so it's totally free to everyone. We do this through the grants that you heard about, and so and other contributions, because we don't want families' health and their mental health to suffer because there's so many other bills that come in after a funeral. And so we want that to be a priority as well. So certainly, no, we are United Way funded as well, but we have many grants that we try to receive from that. There are, that's my contact information, but then there are some other resources in your packet and on the website that have some things for suicide-specific resources. And so those are also in your packet. And then as the end, I encourage you to share this information and allow students to know how much you care by companioning them. But I do thank you for all that you do. I know what it's like to be in those classrooms and be on that crisis team, and I know the energy it takes, and I know that that's a huge piece of what people can do to support those grieving kids. So whether it's from suicide or other losses, I really encourage you to be a part of their support team and help to walk with them and companion them through this. Are there any questions I can answer about any specific things developmentally or any of those? Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations or experience working with perpetrators of bullying that victim has committed suicide, or just anything about that?
You know, that isn't something that I have right here with me, but I know that there are bullying programs that deal more with the bully, the bullied, and the bystander kind of thing, and all 3 of them have kind of ways that you address them specifically. And I know that we did some of those kinds of things in school, but I don't have resources to give to everyone about that. But certainly it is important to empower those students who are bullied, but also work with those students who obviously are doing that, so in both frames to be able to address that. I can talk with you a little more individually. I don't have things right off the top of my head right now. Thanks. Anybody else with questions? Thank you. I appreciate all that you do, and I appreciate you.